Some of the first missions to fly out of the Galveston Army Airfield were in search of submarines, flying anti-submarine squadrons over the Gulf of Mexico, as there were plenty of German U-boats. Fort Crockett was used during World War I and World War II to train troops before being sent to Europe. It was also used as artillery and a garrison for the United States to protect Galveston. Any enemy vessels that could potentially enter the harbor. This set of coastal artillery came in handy during World War I and World War II, as there were plenty of German U-boats in the Gulf of Mexico. Imagine it's 1942, the United States is at war with Japan and Germany, and you look out into the Gulf of Mexico, and you see a periscope looking right back at you. That would not be a welcome sight here in Galveston. Let's get into it. Welcome to Galveston Unscripted. Thank you to our video sponsor, The Daily News, bringing you the news since 1842. Texas' oldest newspaper. Support your local newspaper, The Daily News. On December 11th, 1941, 4 days after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, the United States declared war on Japan, and Germany followed suit and declared war on the United States. This became known as World War II. The European front was over 5,000 miles away from Galveston Island, but there were still threats here in the Gulf of Mexico. For this episode, I'm gonna enlist the help of Mr. George Osborne, who sat down with me in the studio to talk all about World War II here in Galveston, and we talked a lot about U-boats in the Gulf of Mexico. Take it away, George.
Read one story where it was a mop with a handle floating around. It's somebody, it looked like a periscope. Wouldn't look like one to me.
Everything looks like a U-boat.
If I'm a mile or two away and it's like, holy moly. My God, how many U-boats are out there?
Galveston Island and the Houston Ship Channel were targets for German U-boats and submarines. But you may be wondering, why? Galveston, Texas City, and Houston are major ports. And much like today, Houston is a major exporter of oil and oil products. Germany was looking to put pressure on the United States in any way it could. This included disrupting and putting pressure on the supply chain of oil and oil products, which made the Houston Ship Channel a major target. Oil and fuel were imperative for the United States and the United States military. Think about it. Almost every piece of equipment runs on oil or fuel, like naval vessels, tanks, trucks, and any piece of major equipment, especially in the 1940s. During the first 3 months of 1942, German U-boats sank over 100 vessels in the Gulf of Mexico and along the American East Coast. You may be wondering, what is the difference between a submarine and a U-boat? Well, I'm here to tell you, not much. The word U-boat is just an anglicized version of the word U-boot, which is short for the German word Unterseeboot. During World War I and World War II, U-boats conducted unrestricted warfare on pretty much any vessel that was not allied with Germany, including unarmed merchant vessels. In the 1940s, during World War II, U-boats were notoriously difficult to detect. They could be sitting right off the coastline of Galveston, and we wouldn't even know it unless we saw a periscope sticking out of the water. There were even citizen groups that got together, would walk down to the beach, grab binoculars, and look out to the horizon to see if they could see any sign of U-boats.
I talked to a woman, her father had been a volunteer beach guy, and they would sit out there on the beach with binoculars and look for German submarines. 1942, this place would have been wartime. There were blackouts. There were ships pulling in here that had been damaged out there in the ocean. We are involved, when I say we, Galveston, this part of Texas, we got military bases here. We got a blimp flying around looking for submarines. We got an air base here that's training people. We got Fort Crockett. There's a lot of military activity here. Lots of military activity. It was a very, very dangerous situation for merchant seamen and anybody out there.
Can you imagine walking along the beachfront here in Galveston and looking out into the Gulf of Mexico and knowing there are German U-boats just a few miles away? We may not really think about too much is that there were ships leaving here and coming to Port of Galveston who were going through those naval choking points, you know, between Haiti and the coast of Florida.
We don't know how many U-boats are out there at any time.
In 1942 and 1943, there were over 20 U-boats in the Gulf of Mexico, aimed at sinking any vessel that could potentially benefit the United States of America or its allies. And any way that Germany could hinder operations of the United States, they were going to try it. And the story George is about to tell us is about a Galveston captain who caught himself in the crossfire of U-boats not once, but twice.
Lykes Line had an office here in Galveston, and Lykes Line had a big office in New Orleans, and that was a big player in merchant ships. 42, early in the war, a few months after Pearl Harbor, Gus Darnell, he was a captain of a Lykes Line ship at the Cardonia, his first ship. Right off the coast of Haiti, there's a German submarine on the surface. They sink another ship within sight. The Cardonia is trying to get away. Now, these are not fast ships. These U-boats can really move on the surface. So they start chasing the Cardonia. This is during the daylight. Cardonia makes smoke, weaves back and forth. Submarine fires 52 shots at them out of their deck gun over about a period of an hour and a half.
Oh my God.
Now, I want you to think if you were standing on the deck of the Cardonia and these Germans are firing this gun at you, and the noise, the smoke, the fear, and they will actually hit the Cardonia. The order to abandon ship is given. There was one man killed. They abandon the ship. The submarine pulls up, shoots a couple more into the hull to sink the ship. Now think about this. These guys are in this lifeboat watching.
Yeah.
They're helpless. Germans will come over. They will. Now later in the war, this would not happen. But they give them some water. They give them a compass bearing to Haiti, which is about 15 miles away, just a little bit over the horizon. They are unarmed vessels. If they did have a weapon on it, sometimes the Naval Armed Guard, they would put these, but this was some of these old cannons that had been set in front of the VFW from World War I. So Captain Darnell, he will come back to Galveston. He says, you know, it's getting a little dangerous out there. He goes back out just as a couple months later on a ship called the Tilly Lykes. Never shows up again. Now later after the war, the records are all put together, and the Tilly Lykes get sunk by German submarine, and there is no survivors. These two U-boats that sunk the Cardonia and then the Tilly Lykes, they would be lost later in the war with all hands. So they did not survive the war either.
Imagine just 80 years ago, standing here along the beachfront and looking out into the Gulf of Mexico and seeing a periscope looking right back at you. This was the case for many port cities in the United States during World War II. During World War II, there were even mandatory blackouts here on Galveston Island. This was not an uncommon occurrence along the United States during World War II. So I learned about blackouts, not from Galveston, but when I went to Pearl Harbor last year, they talked about how they would black out the island. They would turn all the lights off. So why would they turn the lights off here in Galveston?
The problem is if there are submarines out there, the enemy, and a ship comes in at night, between the lights and the submarine, it silhouettes that ship. They had a big problem with that on the East Coast. They didn't turn the lights out, and they lost a whole bunch of merchant ships that way. So that's why you want to black the city out for those sort of things. And again, we don't know how many U-boats are out there at any time.
A few German U-boats were even detected by U.S. Navy vessels and sunk right off the coast of Texas, Louisiana, and Florida. There have been quite a number of shipwrecks that have been found in the Gulf of Mexico, usually by oil drilling vessels or survey vessels. And you can go online right now and see how well preserved some of these sunken U-boats are at the bottom of the Gulf of Mexico. And although these U-boats were sunk over 80 years ago, they're still in pretty good shape.
Over at Pier 21, there is a monument they put up for 50 years after D-Day. And it shows there that ships sunk in the Gulf of Mexico, in the Bahamas, and there's dots on there for them. It's very moving. When you go look at it, it's like, oh man, look at all these ships. A lot of ships, a lot of crews. So it's pretty sad things. And we have very few monuments to our merchant marines that were lost.
Now, covering this topic today is a good reminder that this was not even a century ago, that we were standing along the coastline looking out for enemy vessels right off our shores. A huge thank you to Mr. George Osborne for joining me in the studio to discuss Galveston and World War II. If you want to see that entire interview, click the link in the description. We discuss World War II and Galveston's role. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to like and subscribe and follow us on all social media. We are everywhere. And if you haven't yet, go check out the podcast feed. We've got hours and hours of historical content on that podcast. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time on Galveston Unscripted.